Hello and very good afternoon to everybody. I'm your host, Srendra Niman. Thank you for joining us for today's part webinar, Compromising Organizational Systems through Chaining. Before we get started, please let me take a few minutes to introduce Payato. Payato is a research-powered boutique cybersecurity consulting firm. We have a decade-long track record with a singular focus on cybersecurity. Payato's impact is delivered every day through three verticals. Number one, community and conference. Payato runs hardware.io, a hardware security focused conference along with other initiatives. Number two, consulting and training. We primarily focus on offensive security assessments. And number three, products. Payato has also released two products in private beta trials, exploiting a firmware analysis framework and CloudFirst, an advanced fuzzing framework. This slide is an overview of the various consulting assessments we execute for our customers across the globe. We have delivered talks and workshops worldwide in some of the top security conferences like Black Hat, DEF CON, and Concert West. This has been our decade-long impact to contribute to robust cybersecurity community in India and globally. Without further ado, let's get started with our webinar. Today's speaker, Revant, is a cybersecurity ninja and a certified security consultant at Payato. You can read about his various accomplishments on this slide. Before I hand over to Revant, here are a few housekeeping tips. Please be on mute. If you have a question, you feel free to write it in the chat box. We will answer the questions during the few intervals in the webinar or towards the end of the webinar. A recording will be released later via LinkedIn, so please make sure you're following LinkedIn on. Please make sure you're following Payato on LinkedIn. Revant, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Surendra. So just let me share my screen. Yeah. Hello, guys. Thanks for joining the webinar. And today the focus is going to be on compromising organizational systems through chaining attacks. And Surendra has given a nice introduction about me, so I'll skip this slide for the time being, and we will dive into the contents directly. So I'll be setting the context before we get started with the webinar. So what to expect from this webinar? It's not a tutorial style where you get introduction to different vulnerabilities, nor you will learn about some antivirus bypass techniques or pivoting tips or anything. And neither you will become some magic hacker by the end of 30 minutes by learning about different techniques in this field. So what you can expect in the next 30 minutes, you will learn about overall security posture of the complete architecture, and you will learn much in detail about architectural view of things and how you can conclude things from black box perspective and different layers of protection and how they can be bypassed, how we leverage the human psychology to perform some escalation attacks, and of course the walkthrough of our entire journey on how we hacked a complete multi-million-dollar client of ours by chaining multiple attacks. So that is the context, and let's get started. So this is the outline of today's talk, and it will be in 5 phases. The initial one would be from recon to SQL injection, and followed by that, we will escalate SQL injection to remote code execution. And from remote code execution to getting persistent access, there is some antivirus that will be blocking our connections. You will see how we found a way around this checks and we gained persistent access. And from remote code execution or persistent access to how we compromise the entire internal Windows domains system. And from there, how we managed to bypass Google two-factor authentication and hack their support Gmail account. So this is the agenda for today. So for people who are not familiar with SQL injection or who are not from security domain, this is just a small introduction on what SQL injection is. Whenever you visit some domain, let's say there is an ID parameter that takes a value, and once you send that request to the backend server, it passes whatever the ID parameter is here into the particular SQL query, processes it, and then it returns you the response. As simple as that. So if it wants to check whether an user is existing or not, this is how it looks like. But the main issue is when the backend developer is trusting the user input blindly. For example, instead of giving the ID, we are appending some other text to it. So this is a SQL query to drop the entire table. So if you run this command, or if you are giving this as an input to this endpoint, then automatically this query will be processed, and finally the table will be dropped, and the developer will lose the complete information about the users. So this is just a basic introduction of SQL injection for those who are not from security background. There won't be any these kind of tutorials in the upcoming slides. So how we found the SQL injection? So we were exploring the application, we were testing all the functionalities of it, and then we encountered an error-based SQL injection. So for people who are not familiar with error-based SQL injection, as you can see here, whatever we provide as a query to this ID parameter, that is being passed into the SQL query. If there is any syntactical error you do while providing this query, that will be reflected to the user, and from that we will come to know there is an error-based SQL injection. If you want to learn more, maybe you can do that later on, but for now you can just understand that we found an error-based SQL injection through multiple entry points. There were a forgot page entry point. It is an unauthenticated page. From there we found an SQL injection, and also there is some internal search functionality after we authenticate into the application. Even there we found an SQL injection. So these were the two entry points, and we were using a tool like SQL Map, or you can use any other tool that do the job for you. It will eventually take the endpoint and all the parameters, and it will perform the SQL queries and eventually retrieve us the list of database. As you can see here, it shows the operating system name and the server it is running. It's having the .NET framework on the backend, and it is having a SQL Server 2016. And here it lists the complete database. This is like the usual stuff, but things get interesting from the next slide. So from this, we concluded this might be the architectural design. So we are sending an SQL inject as an attacker. We are sending an SQL injection payload to the web server or the database, and there it is processing something and it is returning the response to us. So what we can do is, since it is running an SQL Server 2016, we can try to get a reverse shell from the SQL Server. So we will try to inject a reverse shell payload via SQL injection. And we assumed we will get a reverse shell. And once we get a reverse shell, we will be able to enumerate more of the systems. And here is the part where things get complicated while we obtain the reverse shell. And also we performed an Nmap scan on this same web server and database, and we found port 80 and 443 to be open. It is used for HTTP traffic and 443 is for HTTPS. And we did not find any vulnerabilities or misconfigurations over there. So this is of no use for us. Right now, the only entry point we are having is SQL injection, through which we will send our payload, and we have to see if we will get a reverse shell to us or not. And we used Metasploit for the purpose because it will have a verbose output option, and we can see the different kind of things that happen before we get a reverse shell. So for people who are not familiar with reverse shell, it just simply opens a port on your local machine and expects the target machine to connect back to you and give you a complete command prompt access or the terminal access. So if you see here, it says started reverse TCP handler on port 677. So once we have the reverse TCP shell, once we start this local server and we send the payload through SQL injection, you can see here there is a connection established from our local port 677 to some other IP we redacted for obvious reasons on this port. And here you can see it says some timeout occurred while attempting to open a remote session, and we were not even able to see the shell. So we tried it again multiple times, and we realized the session or the shell is getting terminated within 1 to 5 seconds of its display. So here we didn't add that screenshot, but once we get this shell, after 1 to 5 seconds, it used to get terminated like this. and we were totally confused because we have the SQL injection, we have access to the database. We even tried dumping the database as well, but the database is so huge that even after 2 hours, we were not able to retrieve some quality data from it, because we need to run multiple SQL queries on the database to fetch the information we want, some juicy information. But considering the database is so huge, we were not able to do it directly. So we thought maybe if we get a remote access or reverse shell to the system, we will be able to escalate more and do some other things as well. And so we even tried enumerating a lot for the other things, like for enumeration, we tried checking for the open ports, outdated services, third-party apps, everything and anything that we can chain with SQL injection. And we just have a query. So I'll just go back, and here someone was asking how we got the SQL injection. I mean, how we got a reverse shell from SQL injection. So there is something called XP command shell option. So you can explore more about it. And through that, we were able to get a reverse shell. So I'll continue from here. And we tried checking for almost everything for one complete day, for all the third-party apps, everything, outdated services, and these services, as you can see here, 80 and 443 are open. We tried looking for vulnerabilities in them, but even after exploring for one complete day, we found nothing, literally zero leads. We have everything, we have the SQL injection, we have the database, but we are not able to escalate it further. So this is some inspirational quote which I remember reading somewhere. So when we are stuck with a problem, just treat it from the beginning with a fresh mind. So we moved back to square one again, and we started with some keen observation, trying to locate the minute details, not to miss anything. And luckily, we unleashed a new point, and we realized it was such a close miss. We missed something very simple, but it's kind of hard to see when you are so excited that you found an SQL injection or some P1 vulnerability. So what we missed in real, so as you can see here, the same screenshot. So we opened 677 port on our local machine, and we connected it to the remote server. I mean, we got reverse shell, and from there, natural design. We thought this might be the case, and 80 and 443 ports are open, but we can't do anything. So we are logged. But something weird happened here. And when the shell is opened, we have the remote system IP here. And what we observed was this IP is different from the web server's IP address. So we have a web server over here, but the reverse shell which we are getting, it is not coming from this address. It is coming from somewhere else. So where is it coming from? And how did it even happen? So this is what we concluded, or we expected. We are sending our reverse shell payload to the web server. It is processing it. But when we are getting a reverse shell, it is coming from some unknown server. We don't know from where. And so what we concluded was maybe the web server and database are not running on the same machine. Maybe the database is running to process the queries. Two servers involved in this architectural design by the developers of that multi-million-dollar company. And whatever reverse shell we are getting, we assumed, even this is not sure because we are performing a black box test and we don't know whether it's a database server or some other server. But since the payload we are sending it, it is going to the data. There we are getting a address of only web server to perform the pen test. But there is some other server and we don't even know about its IP. But through this SQL injection and through the reverse shell payload, which was giving a verbose output on Metasploit, we were able to get the IP address of the database. And we concluded there are two different databases or two different servers. And once again, Shodan for rescue. Shodan is just a website where it automatically scans all the connected systems on the internet, and it will perform some enumeration. As you can see here, even it is having two ports open, the database server. So did you see that? I mean, I guess the screenshot is small, so I'll just zoom in a bit. So even here, two ports are open, but they are different. It is 1433 and 3389. And as you can see here, 1433 is used for SQL Server running, and 3389 is for remote desktop protocol or RDP connection. So even here, there are two ports open. And so this is what we concluded. So this is the architecture we already seen previously. And here there are two different ports open, 1433 and 3389. And on this server, it is 80 and 443. And similarly, I mean, as usual, as we discussed previously, we are getting a reverse shell from this database server, but these ports are interesting. So we enumerated a bit more, and these are the conclusions which we already made. And we tried to scan both the 1433 and 3389 for common vulnerabilities, public exploits, any remote code executions, and there was nothing we found. But still, all these facts are pretty fascinating that we came to know there is some other database server. And sorry, just a minute. Yeah, so this is pretty fascinating that we found a lot of new information that there is a complete new database on different service or different server, and we got that IP address. We found that new ports are open on it, and that is all good. But our main problem still remains the same. Once we get the reverse shell that is being terminated by some antivirus or some bad script every 1 to 5 seconds, how to fix that? I mean, how would you approach it? Maybe you can think for a second, and you can just come up with your own ideas. Maybe you can think for yourself or drop it in the chat. How would you approach in this case? So remember, the RDP service is open. Why not try to leverage or exploit that open RDP service to gain persistent access? So for people who are not familiar with RDP service, it's a remote desktop connection where once you configure a system to allow remote desktop sharing, you can connect to that system from anywhere in the world just by giving the IP address, username, and password of that system. So this is RDP, and this kind of service is open on the database server. So it is allowing any user across the world to connect to it if he or she knows the IP address, username, and password. But still, we are not having any RDP user login credentials, and neither there are any RCE exploits for the RDP service which is running on the server. So how to go from here? Even now we are stuck at step 0. The antivirus still terminates our interactive shell. So we will try to leverage this open RDP service, and we will see if we can try something new. And so I'll just, I'll give you a minute to think, and meanwhile I will answer the questions in the chat. So someone is asking, have you tried the OS shell through SQL map? Yes, we did try OS shell through SQL map, but our session was being terminated immediately and we didn't find any useful information. After that, we tried it through Metasploit with verbose output enabled, and there we were able to get the IP address of the database server. So it was showing from where the connection is being established. And from then on, we were able to build new steps on the architectural point of view. And even with Metasploit, the shell is getting terminated, but we got some useful input. And someone else is saying you can brute force using the SQL database. That is a nice way, but the SQL database is so huge and we were not able to dump any details, any useful details, even after running SQL map for 2 hours. So we are assuming that they must be having some hundreds of GB of data. So it's of no use. So brute force is not a way, maybe something else. So back to some operating system basics, or to again back to college. So whenever a process is forked by a parent process, and if the parent process gets killed, can't enumerate much. But once the interactive terminal is terminated, but the process we executed, it still continues to run in the background because the process has been triggered already, and there is nothing else that can stop the forked process unless there is some script which is implemented by the developers. Luckily, there isn't something like that implemented over here. So we got lucky, you can say. So we can say we were thinking how to leverage this functionality. Even though the terminal or the shell is terminated, we want to run something on the background that will allow us to gain reverse shell access to the system and get a persistent shell of access so that we can enumerate more. So this is what we came up with. Why not create a new user? Since we have this command shell already, why not run 1 or 2 commands that will create a new user via SQL injection? And why not use that new login credentials to log in via RDP? Since, as I previously mentioned, remote desktop client or connection, it just wants an IP address, username, and password to give you the connection. If you are able to create a new user, and then if you are able to log in with it, we will get a persistent access. But how to do that? So since it is running a Windows system, Windows 10 on the background, we used the Windows commands and we made it in a 1-line query. And we executed all these commands at once. Once we got the shell, we executed all these commands as a 1-liner command. Here it is creating a new user called PA2PT. And then it is adding it to the administrators group. So it is simply giving it administrative access. And finally, we are giving it remote management users access as well, so that we can remotely log in into that system through RDP service. So using these commands, we were able to create a new user, give him or her an administrator privilege, and even gain remote management users permission as well. And once the new user is created, we were able to log in directly through RDP. And we were able to get access to the database server. So this is how we were able to gain a persistent access by bypassing the antivirus, though it was blocking it. They are using Windows. Once we got access into this RDP machine, we looked at the configuration files and the list of antivirus they are using. And then we figured out they are using the network policies of Windows Defender to block the new connections. And so simply we turned off the antivirus, and then we were able to get a persistent shell. So we concluded that the Windows Defender configuration is the thing that is preventing us from gaining a persistent access. So once we are into the database server, so we were fascinated about to perform lateral movement and see what kind of machines are existing or what are the juicy information which is available for us in the system. So enumeration of internal systems. As I mentioned previously in the beginning of the talk, this won't be a tutorial on how to perform lateral movements or how the tool works, what are the commands we give. It will be an overall overview. So we performed Nmap scan to discover all kind of active hosts on the system. And then we used Mimikatz to gain the administrative privileges. And Mimikatz is having an option, like you can see here, there is something called log on passwords. once we run this command with Mimikatz tool, it will show the password information of all the users data that is stored in the memory in plain text. So once we have the plain text passwords of other systems or users who are logged in, we can use those information to pivot into the other systems. Or alternatively, you can even dump the NTLM hashes of the Windows passwords and reuse them using pass the hash technique to spawn process as other user. So in simple terms, you are logged in as a Py2PT user and there is some other dev user and you want to spawn a process as dev user. So using Mimikatz, we will get the NTLM password hash of that particular user and we will use that hash to spawn a process on behalf of that user. So in that way, we can spawn process as other users, or even we can gain a lot of other informations as well. And with this information, we did RDP into the other internal systems. Since Mimikatz tool is capable of providing us with the plain text passwords, we know the password, we know the username, and from the Nmap scan, we were able to even gain access to the IP address as well. So RDP requires all of them. We have IP address through Nmap, username and password through Mimikatz. So we did RDP into other systems. Luckily, RDP was open on all the internal systems. So simply we did RDP into all the other systems and we were able to gain a lot of information and insights on the system. So few of the interesting things we observed in this process. The one thing is access to password protected internal FTP servers. There is some FTP server and we had the password of that. And in that, there are a lot of sensitive information related to users, which I can't disclose for obvious reasons again. And there are some MariaDB login credentials, support email, SMTP automation scripts, API keys of multiple other payment services, third-party applications, analytics, crash logs, everything, because everything is happening from there. And we even got IP address of multiple other services, which are not even linked or exposed to the public interface or through web application. And we also realized why we were not able to dump the database through SQL queries even after 2 hours, because it is having a ping size of 536 GB of user data. And it's not easy to dump data from it, considering the huge size. And even there is another backup system which is isolated from all connections, and it is having 2 terabytes of user data as well. And also we gained access to customers' PI and PII information, which is considered as highly sensitive and private, which are specific to the users. So now you know how we started with SQL injection, how we got our way around the antivirus and gained persistent access. And from there, how we escalated through internal systems and saw how the things are located, different payment API keys, passwords, hidden scripts, lot other things. But the thing which fascinated us even more is the SMTP script of the support Gmail account. There is a script that automatically sends replies to the mails, and it is having the username and password of the Gmail account. But even before we dive into that, have you ever wondered how many emails are left unread on a support desk of a multi-million-dollar company? They get hundreds of mails every day, and they might not even have the support staff to look into these mails. And in this case, we found around 280,125 unread emails on the support email of that company. And how we did that, even it is pretty interesting, at least for me. So we got the email address from the automation script on the backup server. Once we escalated into the systems internally, we were able to get our hands on into some backup automation scripts. And there we got the username and password of this support email. And once we had the support email and password, we tried to log in, obviously. And it is protected with a 2-factor authentication. So what to do now? We got so far, and If we are able to bypass this, we will get to know a lot more. So what we did was we thought of playing with the other functionality. And here, as you can see, it asks for the recovery phone number. And once, there is an option of 2FA. We provide our phone number, and if the phone is not reachable, and if it is not able to send some verification code, or if it is not able to call to us, Google gives us an option to confirm the recovery number, and it will allow us to log in. And we clicked on that, and you can see it says the phone number should be end. Google isn't stupid enough to leave brute forcing option available on this parameter. That is something fascinating, or it's not fascinating. You can say it is even stupid to try brute force on this part, but nevertheless, we don't want to leave any chance. So we tried and we failed miserably. And what now? How can you retrieve the recovery phone number and bypass this check to gain some more further access? So think for a minute, like what are the different ways you can think of? You have the username and password, you have the email ID and password. And okay, someone is saying search Truecaller, search on Google with username, but we don't have the username. We just have the email ID. It just says support.thecompany_name@gmail.com. What will you search for? Right. Nikhil is on the right track. He's saying get the names and phone numbers from the backup if available. Right. We have the database and we have the usernames, but as I mentioned already, it is of 536 GB of database, and it's $1 million company. So there are a lot of users who are waiting to, a lot of users who registered for the company. So how will you filter among those thousands of users the correct phone number? It's not practically feasible to brute force everything, but stop here. And but from the client point of view, assume you are the client and you gave us a project to pen test. We found an SQL injection, we found a way around your antivirus bypass, we even gained access to your RDP service, and from there we were able to escalate into the RDP service and compromise all the internal systems and do a lot of other things. But we don't want to stop here, because right now we have all the access, which is just limited to the things stored on the server. There are a lot of other things which are stored on the cloud, which are not existing on their local servers or whatever servers we have access to. So we want to see that information. So we try to bypass something else, and we came up with a new hack over here. We thought of exploiting the lazy human psychology hack. Usually we tend to become lazy when we have a lot of things to do or while we are multitasking. And it is common for developers or security people to make easy mistakes. So as you must have remembered that there is a database with all the users' information, which relates to employees and users as well. And for the record, there are 58,422 users. So we are having 58,422 phone numbers to brute force. And Google will not allow us to perform such scans over the system. So what we thought was, maybe the developer or the support person, he must be a customer of the company he is working with. And he must have used the same number as two-factor authentication. That is some simple hack which anyone will do. So we thought that support person must have done the same thing. So we have the access to the database, which we got through RDP hack. and it is having the PI and PII information. For people who are not familiar with PII information, it's personally identification information, which connects back to the online user, through which the any service provider can get in contact with the user. So this PII information includes the personal phone numbers as well. So we are having access to 58,422 phone numbers. So that is good. We have some lead, but how to proceed from here? So if you remember from the previous screenshot, we have the last 2 digits of the phone number. So it is saying like we have the phone number should be ending with 31. We don't want to brute force it completely, but what we will do is back to basics again. We will run an simple SQL query. I guess Bhaskar got it right. We'll grep for 31, but it's not just grepping. SQL gives us a vast functionality of performing queries. So we execute this command on that 536 GB of database. So what this does is it will list all the phone numbers which are ending with 31. And just with this simple hack, the target users dropped from 58,000 to 36 users. So that is good. Like that is a huge improvement from 58,000 to 36. Now we have to just brute force 36 users phone numbers. But even then, do you think Google will allow you to brute force 36 phone numbers consecutively, or even by taking some breaks? Definitely not. Google will block you after 3 attempts, and it will lock your account for maybe 2 hours or 3 hours. And again, it will give you some more chance. And maybe doing that repeatedly for 5 to 6 times, it might block your account completely. So what would be your hack here? You have the 36 phone numbers, which are ending with 31 number. So logically, what we thought was whoever is handling the database or who is with the support team, they must be from the beginning of the company, or they might be using them. Okay, someone is saying call all those 36 people. Okay, that's a good one, but we are given a pen test project, so we cannot include social engineering as a part of it. And also that takes a lot of strain. You can't just call them and ask, where are you working? Or you're the support person? Are you having the number? And someone else is saying in the chat, can we try checking if the support user logged in into the internal system? Well, that is a way, but still from that, we won't be able to get the phone number of that support person. What is we have the mail ID. So there must be some relevance to the name and the mail ID. The mail ID we are having is the support mail ID. It just says support.something@gmail.com. So someone is saying who logged in the most. Even that, the logs will be automatically cleared after some time. So someone is also saying we will get access if this session is active. So here there is no role of session. Here we are just trying to figure out the mobile number of the support person. This might be the case that he logged in maybe 10 days ago, but still his phone number still exists from that. So as Bhaskar is saying, we are trying to group it by date, but it's not just simply date. We are trying to sort it on account creation date, because whenever you have a phone number or whenever you get an access to the database through SQL injection, whenever you see the ID 1, it always points to the administrator user or the developer who is accessing that database or who developed the application. So we thought maybe whoever created this in the beginning, they might be existing. Like, so we sorted in that order. We might be wrong, but we thought of taking a chance. And luckily we got a hit on the 4th number. After 3 attempts, our account was locked out for 2 hours or so. And then again, we tried with the 4th number and we got access because we sorted it on the account creation date. And luckily the employee was working with the company for a long time, I guess. So his number is still not changed. And we were able to gain access. So even we have one more query is saying, how have you turned off and evaded the defender? What was your approach? So what we done was we created a new user name and password through SQL injection, and we used those details to log in through RDP service. And once we logged in into the system through RDP, it considers it as a legit login, and it's not something related to network policies. So it will not block that connection. So once we are inside it with administrator privileges, we simply blocked that antivirus just to confirm that it is the thing that is blocking our connection. Once we confirmed that the Windows Defender is the thing that is blocking our connection, we again re-enabled it because we have the RDP connection. And as you can see here, there are 280,000 emails available which are unread on the support desk. So what is my pro takeaway from this? So do not ever run the database services with administrative privileges. For that matter, not just database services, do not ever run any service with administrative privileges unless until it is required. So what's my favorite hack in this complete scenario? So we did a lot of things, like we bypassed the antivirus. I mean, there is an antivirus that was blocking or terminating our interactive shell. There is an RDP service which is running and open to public. And still we don't have the RDP login credentials with us. And there is this SQL server running with administrative privileges. We leveraged that SQL injection to create a new user. And since we created a new user with administrative rights, we are able to log in into the system with that new user, and we are able to dump the hashes of other users, dump the plain text passwords using Mimikatz as other users, and we were able to RDP into other systems on the internal network. We got our hands on the backup server as well. And from there, we found some automation script that revealed the support email, username, email ID, and password. And with that, we were able to perform the Gmail two-factor authentication bypass. So what is the important or key point that pivoted us into performing this severe escalations? So in my opinion, it is this line, SQL server that is running with administrative privileges. Why am I saying it is running with administrative privileges? Because once we got the SQL shell, and from there we created a new user, and then we added him or her into the administrators group. If SQL server is running as a normal user with low privileged user, it will spawn a shell with low privileged user, and he will not have the permissions to add a new user into administrative group. But since the SQL server is running with administrative privileges, we are able to fork a process or fork a shell with administrative privileges. And since we executed our new user commands from administrative shell, we got the option to create an administrative user. And also the Mimikatz point, it will be only able to dump the hashes or the plain text passwords of the logged in users when you are an administrator user. Since SQL server was running with administrative privileges, we created an administrative user. And since we logged in through that, we were able to dump all the hashes. So if we fix this one thing in the green line, all the below points goes redacted. We wouldn't have been able to hack any of these because the antivirus was blocking our persistent shell. And there isn't much we can do apart from dumping the whooping 536 GB of database, which is time consuming and resource consuming. So what else the other takeaways you can take? So the RDP service which is running and open to the public. So assume if the RDP service, this one line is fixed, all the below things goes redacted, and we wouldn't have been able to do any of these attacks. And since we were able to log in through RDP, we got access to the SQL server, all the internal systems, backup scripts, support Gmail username, passwords, and everything. just assume if this RDP service is not available and the antivirus was continuously blocking your persistent shell, would you have been able to do anything? At least I couldn't think of any. So who's responsible for all this? Is it just the developer who developed the code and left SQL injection vulnerable? Or is it the network engineers who were using the same password for all the internal systems? Or is it the operations team who did not even check that SQL server is running with root privileges or administrative privileges? Or is it me or my colleague Nanda Kumar? We both worked on this project, and is it us who just hacked into all of these things? Is it our mistake? Or is it the mistake of entire computers, the invention, Charles Babbage? So that's an entire separate discussion. I will leave it for you to think, decide, and maybe you can DM me. But some useful things before we wrap up for today. So using of parameterized queries would have prevented SQL injection, and services that handle user data should be running with low privileges. Here, the SQL service is handling the user data and it is taking user inputs. So even if that SQL service is compromised, we need to make sure that does not escalate into something more severe. We need to stop or reduce the damage. So that is the reason we should be running any service with low privileges as possible. And do not use the same passwords for all the services or the systems, because there were multiple systems. Once we got into the RDP machine on the database machine, we saw there were 4 to 5 systems, and all the systems were using the same password. So just with one plain text, we were able to log in into everything. And the backup server, even that password, we were not able to see it through Mimikatz. But we assumed that since all the passwords are same, the backup server password must also be the same. It is on a complete different subnet for the record. So we used the same password and we got access to the backup server as well. And try to use a separate phone number for two-factor authentication and keep it isolated from your personal use, because these kind of things might happen. You might think like this is not possible, and even if you see all these hacks as singular point of view, if you are just seeing a SQL injection or just seeing the SQL server which is running as administrative privileges, or if you are just seeing you are using only two-factor authentication, your personal mobile number, none of them matter. You just think it's not possible to hack practically. But when you are chaining all these things, it creates a very powerful impact and a worst nightmare for the company. And do not expose the unwanted services to the internet. RDP service on the database server, why is it required to expose to the internet? Even assume if you have some business requirement and you have to expose it, configure your firewall rules to whitelist the IP address from where the connections should be taken or established. So that's it, I guess. And if you are having any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and the moderators will let me know. Or I can see a few things. Nikhil is saying we always encourage defense in depth. So it was a mistake at DB level, OS hardening level, and backup configuration also. Right, Nikhil? So here there are multiple people who are involved in this, who are responsible for this vulnerability. The developers who developed the code and left SQL injection, the network engineers who are using the same passwords for all the internal systems, and the operations team who left the SQL server which is running with root privileges. So combining all of them, we were able to create an impact in this. So any more questions?
Yeah.
So Gogo is saying, in my humble opinion, perhaps a better threat modeling of the situation at the start would have been more scalable or proactive solution. Right, that is a thing, but threat modeling takes a lot of time, and that's the reason most of the companies skip it, because they need to meet the user requirements. That's their primary task. And once they have some user requirement in their mind, and if they are having a deadline, they just want to launch the features rather than focusing on the security aspect. That's the reason security should be an integral part of development, and people are encouraging these days. And Bhaskar is asking, how long did it take you? So we could have taken more time and perform the social engineering, as few of the guys suggested, but we are dealing with a client and we had a deadline, and we need to complete a complete extensive report on how we did all these things. So we finished the complete reporting, hacks and everything in around a week. But if we had some more time, we would have even explored it more. And one more thing I would like to add here is, once we gained access to the support email, we were even able to gain access to the Google Drive. And there were a lot of other sensitive legal agreements made between that $1 million company and other clients of theirs. So even we could have tampered with it, and it will be a worst nightmare for the company. So that's the reason we were more fascinated about hacking into the cloud. And someone is Nikhil is asking, will we be getting a copy of this presentation? Yeah, I can upload it to GitHub or something. I don't mind. And I guess this presentation will go on YouTube as well. Yeah, Sanjay, this will go live on YouTube. Surinder, let me know if I'm wrong. And David is asking, did you find the SQL injection manually or directly through SQL map scan? No, initially we found an error-based SQL injection. And once we got the confirmation, then we started the active scan, because we don't want to just brute force through SQL map on all the endpoints and create a huge traffic and trigger alarms on the client side. So we want to make it as stealthily as possible. So once we are sure that there is a SQL injection at one point, then only we started SQL map scan. Prem is asking how the AV bypass happened. So Prem, the AV was blocking our persistent shell, and from there we were able to get the IP address of the another machine, new machine, and we concluded that new machine to be a database server, and we performed nmap scan on that system, and from there we were able to see that port 1433 and 3389 were open of MS SQL Server and RDP, and we were able to create a new user through SQL injection, and we were able to find a way around the antivirus part, and we eventually gained access to the system. So the main purpose of the antivirus there is to enforce network policies to make sure no new connections are established to the system. So that is doing a pretty good job. But their other misconfigurations kept the system vulnerable, and we were able to log into that system. I hope that answers your question. And Google is asking, would the presence of web application firewall have been any use, especially if the origin server IP is not accepting any direct connections? Yeah, web application firewall would have been definitely helpful, and it would have even blocked our basic SQL payloads in the beginning itself. So definitely it's a good solution when you are not having much time to implement security in depth at development point of view or at infrastructure level. So that would be an addition, but it will still not stop the main flaws of the application. It will definitely help the web application firewall. Any more questions? And how to improve the security posture in terms of defensive perspective? Please share your better insights. Kaushal, as I have mentioned a few points earlier in this slide, like these are the list of recommended mitigations, and based on our use case, it depends and differs from system to system. But as I have shown here, there were two things which made this hack entirely possible: the SQL server, which was running with admin privileges, and the RDP service, which is open to public. They could have simply run SQL server as non-administrative user. it will take the same amount of time. Just 1 or 2 additional configuration files would have taken, and it would have stopped this complete attack. And even the RDP service, you can easily configure your firewall to whitelist the IP address that allows the RDP connections. So it should work. And Samuel is asking the thing about the child process not getting killed. Aren't those the zombie process? Yeah, I'm not exactly sure of the terms, whether it's a zombie or orphan process as said by Hrishikesh, but that process doesn't get killed and it will get executed. So we leverage that functionality to run our one-liner commands. So even after the shell is terminated, our process were running in the background and we were able to perform the attack. Any more questions? And you can reach out to me on these following links. I'm active almost on everywhere: LinkedIn, Twitter, GitHub, Facebook. Yeah, right. They might be called as zombie process. Thanks for the info. Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Revant, for this wonderful webinar on compromising organizational system through chain attacks. Thank you everyone for joining us. For more questions, you can just reach out to Revant. His Twitter handle is @Revant_cool. Also, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar on LinkedIn. So keep eye on our social media channels. Thank you everyone again. See you in the next webinar.